February 1, 1943, dawn breaks over Biskra Airfield in Algeria as 12 Boeing B-17F Flying Fortresses of the United States Army Air Force's 414th Bombardment Squadron prepare for another strike against German-controlled seaports. The Mediterranean theater of operations has become a grinding war of attrition, with American heavy bombers attempting to strangle Axis supply lines, while German and Italian fighters defend desperately against overwhelming Allied industrial might. Among the B-17s warming up their Wright R-1820 Cyclone engines sits serial number 41 to 24406, nicknamed All-American 3, commanded by Lieutenant Kendrick R. Bragg Jr., a 24-year-old pilot from the American Midwest who has no idea he is about to demonstrate the legendary toughness of Boeing's Flying Fortress in the most dramatic way possible. At 0800 hours, the formation lifts off from the dusty Algerian airfield, each four-engine bomber carrying a crew of 10 men and 6,000 pounds of high-explosive bombs destined for the port facilities at Tunis and Bizerta. The 97th Bombardment Group has been hammering these targets since arriving in North Africa following Operation Torch, the Allied invasion that opened a second front against the Axis powers and trapped German General Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps between British forces advancing from Egypt and American forces pushing eastward from Algeria. Lieutenant Bragg settles into the pilot's seat of All-American 3, running through his checklist with co-pilot Lieutenant G. Engel Jr. while navigator Harry C. Nussel plots their course across 300 miles of contested Mediterranean airspace where German Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Italian Macchi C-202 Folgores prowl like sharks waiting for stragglers. The Boeing factory in Seattle has been producing B-17 Flying Fortresses at an unprecedented rate, with 6,981 aircraft rolling off the production line at Plant 2 alone, while Douglas Aircraft in Long Beach and Lockheed Vega in Burbank contribute thousands more to bring total production to over 12,000 Flying Fortresses by war's end. Each B-17F, like All-American 3, represents the pinnacle of American industrial engineering, featuring 4 turbo-supercharged Wright Cyclone engines generating 1,200 horsepower each, 11 50-caliber machine guns for defense, and a rugged airframe designed to absorb punishment and bring crews home alive. The aircraft stretches 74 feet from nose to tail with a wingspan of 103 feet, capable of flying at 35,000 feet where the thin air provides some protection from enemy fighters and anti-aircraft fire, though today's mission will take the formation much lower for accurate bombing. As the 12 B-17s drone eastward toward their target, German radar operators at Axis airfields across Tunisia pick up the incoming raid and scramble every available fighter to intercept the American bombers before they can drop their deadly cargo on the vital supply ports that keep German and Italian forces in North Africa supplied with fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements. Among the German pilots racing to their Messerschmitt Bf-109G fighters is Feldwebel Erich Paxia, a 24-year-old ace from 6th Staffel of Jagerschwader 53, the famous pick as Ace of Spades, unit that has been fighting British and American air forces across the Mediterranean since the beginning of the war. Paxia has 16 confirmed aerial victories to his credit and knows the reputation of the American Flying Fortresses, but like many German pilots, he believes that aggressive frontal attacks can break up bomber formations and send the surviving aircraft fleeing back to their bases. The Luftwaffe has developed specific tactics for attacking American heavy bombers, with fighters approaching head-on to minimize exposure to the B-17's defensive armament while concentrating firepower on the cockpit and engines where a few well-placed cannon shells can cripple or destroy an entire aircraft and crew. German pilots have studied captured B-17s extensively, noting that while the Flying Fortress mounts 11 50-caliber machine guns, there are still blind spots that can be exploited by determined fighter pilots willing to press home their attacks despite the withering defensive fire that has earned the B-17 its fearsome reputation. Paxia's Bf-109G4 tropical variant, work number 16093, carries two 13mm machine guns above the engine and a single 20mm cannon firing through the propeller hub, providing sufficient firepower to down a bomber if the shells find their mark in a vital area. Italian forces in Tunisia have also been reinforced with some of their best fighter units, including squadrons equipped with the excellent Macchi C-202 Folgore, which has proven itself capable of outmaneuvering British Spitfires and American P-40 Warhawks in the hands of experienced pilots. The Regia Aeronautica's 5th Air Squadron, recently withdrawn from Libya after the defeat at El Alamein, now operates from Tunisian airfields alongside German units in a desperate attempt to maintain air superiority over the central Mediterranean where Allied convoys and bomber formations threaten to cut the Axis lifeline to North Africa. Italian pilots flying the C-202 have achieved remarkable success against Allied aircraft, with some units recording kill-to-loss ratios of 44-1 during the Battle of Burhakim, but they face an increasingly difficult situation as American production lines pour thousands of new aircraft into the Mediterranean theater, while Axis forces struggle with fuel shortages and dwindling pilot strength. The formation of B-17s maintains tight defensive discipline as they approach the Tunisian coast, with each aircraft positioned to provide mutual fire support should German or Italian fighters attempt to break up the raid before the bombers can reach their targets. Bombardier Ralph Burbridge peers through the plexiglass nose of All-American 3, adjusting his Norden bombsight for the final approach to Tunis harbor where German transport ships and Italian supply vessels provide tempting targets for his 6,000-pound load of high-explosive bombs. Behind him, flight engineer and top turret gunner Technical Sergeant Joe C. James scans the sky for enemy fighters while radio operator Paul A. Galloway monitors frequencies for any signs of coordinated German interception attempts, though radio discipline requires maintaining silence until after the bomb run to avoid giving away the formation's exact position and timing. At precisely 1,325 hours, as the B-17s complete their bombing run over Tunis harbor and begin their turn toward home, German and Italian fighters strike with coordinated fury, diving from high altitude where they have been tracking the American formation since it crossed the coastline. Two Messerschmitt Bf-109s attack the lead bomber in the formation while Feldwebel Erich Paxia in his tropical Bf-109G rolls into a high-speed dive toward All-American 3, which flies in the number 2 position where mutual defensive fire from multiple aircraft should provide maximum protection against just such an attack. The sky erupts with tracers as American gunners open fire with their 50-caliber machine guns, creating a web of steel that German fighters must navigate to press home their attacks. But Paxia commits to a head-on pass that will bring him directly through the most concentrated defensive fire the B-17 formation can produce. Ball turret gunner Elton Conda spins his Sperry turret to track the incoming Bf-109 while waist gunner Michael Zook and tail gunner Sam T. Sarpalis add their fire to the defensive barrage that has already damaged one German fighter and sent it smoking toward the Mediterranean far below. The concentrated 50-caliber fire from multiple B-17s creates a storm of lead that few aircraft can survive, but Paxia presses his attack with the determination of a veteran fighter pilot, who understands that breaking up the bomber formation requires accepting enormous risks in exchange for the possibility of destroying one or more of the 4 engine giants that represent American industrial supremacy made manifest in aluminum and steel. His 20mm cannon and twin 13mm machine guns hammer away at All-American 3 as the distance closes to point-blank range, but the B-17's rugged construction absorbs hit after hit while continuing to fly straight and level. The head-on attack reaches its climax as Paxia's Bf-109G flashes over the top of All-American 3 at a combined closing speed of over 500 miles per hour, but instead of breaking away cleanly, the German fighter's wing slices diagonally through the B-17's rear fuselage just forward of the tail section, creating a massive gash that nearly severs the bomber's entire empennage from the rest of the aircraft. The collision destroys Paxia's Bf-109 instantly, killing the young German ace and sending wreckage tumbling toward the Mediterranean while All-American 3 lurches violently upward from the impact before Lieutenant Bragg and co-pilot Engel fight to regain control of their crippled bomber using nothing but engine power and the one remaining elevator cable that represents their only connection to the damaged tail section. The left horizontal stabilizer has been completely torn away, the vertical stabilizer cut in half horizontally, and the massive diagonal slash through the fuselage reveals daylight where solid aluminum should protect the crew from the slipstream. Navigator Lieutenant Charles Cliff Cutforth in the nearby B-17F Flying Flit gun captures the most famous aerial photograph of World War II as he documents All-American 3's incredible damage, showing the bomber's tail section hanging by what appears to be nothing more than thin metal strips and a single control cable while the aircraft continues flying in formation as if nothing has happened. The photograph will become iconic proof of the B-17's legendary ability to absorb battle damage and bring crews home alive. But for the 10 men aboard All-American 3, the immediate problem is determining whether their aircraft can survive the 300-mile flight back to Biskra Airfield, or whether they should abandon the bomber over the Mediterranean and hope for rescue by Allied surface vessels operating in the contested waters below. Flight engineer Joe James reports that the collision has severed all control cables except for the right elevator, eliminated hydraulic and oxygen systems, damaged electrical systems, and created a hole 16 feet long and 4 feet wide at its maximum point where the German fighter's wing carved through the fuselage structure. 2 of the Wright Cyclone engines have shut down, with a third showing signs of oil pressure loss that could lead to complete failure at any moment, leaving all American 3 flying on minimal power while maintaining formation with the other B-17s that provide protection against additional German and Italian fighter attacks. Tail gunner Sam Sarpelis finds himself isolated in the damaged tail section with no floor connection to the rest of the aircraft, but his weight actually helps stabilize the severed empennage by preventing it from flapping in the slipstream that could tear away the remaining structural connections. Lieutenant Bragg discovers that conventional flight controls no longer respond normally, forcing him to use differential engine power to control the aircraft's pitch and direction, while the single remaining elevator cable provides minimal authority over the bomber's attitude. The damaged B-17 wallows through the air like a wounded bird, losing altitude steadily as the remaining engines struggle to maintain airspeed with the massive drag created by the gaping wound in the fuselage. But somehow the aircraft continues flying when every principle of aerodynamics suggests it should have broken apart immediately after the collision. Co-pilot Engel monitors engine instruments carefully, adjusting mixture and prop pitch to extract maximum performance from their remaining power plants, while Bragg concentrates on keeping the bomber straight and level using techniques no flight manual has ever described, because no one believed an aircraft could survive such catastrophic structural damage. The other B-17s in the formation maintain protective overwatch as All-American 3 struggles homeward, with squadron mates ready to call for air-sea rescue if the damaged bomber finally succumbs to its injuries and ditches in the Mediterranean. Radio operator Paul Galloway manages to establish contact with base despite damaged electrical systems, transmitting position reports and damage assessments that leave ground controllers incredulous at the extent of structural failure All-American 3 has survived. The formation commander signals for a slow, careful turn toward Algeria, mindful that any excessive stress on the damaged airframe could complete the separation that Paxia's Bf-109 began, sending the tail section tumbling away and leaving the main fuselage uncontrollable. German fighter controllers monitoring Allied radio traffic cannot believe initial reports of a B-17 flying with its tail nearly severed, assuming that American pilots are exaggerating battle damage for propaganda purposes. But Luftwaffe intelligence officers studying the formation through binoculars from Tunisian airfields confirm that one of the flying fortresses appears to have sustained impossible structural damage yet continues flying in formation with its squadron mates. The site reinforces growing German respect for American industrial engineering and the rugged construction techniques that allow B-17s to absorb punishment that would destroy any other aircraft type, though few German pilots will survive the war to appreciate the full extent of Boeing's achievement in creating a bomber that functions more like an armored flying tank than a conventional airplane. Italian pilots of the Regia Aeronautica monitoring the same radio frequencies express similar disbelief at reports of a B-17 surviving such catastrophic damage, having learned through bitter experience that American bombers require concentrated attacks by multiple fighters to guarantee destruction. The Macchi C-202 Folgores and older Italian fighter types lack the heavy armament needed to quickly disable a flying fortress, forcing Italian pilots to make repeated passes against individual bombers while exposing themselves to devastating defensive fire from 50-caliber machine guns that can destroy a fighter with a single well-placed burst. Many Italian aces have developed profound respect for the B-17's ability to continue fighting even after absorbing dozens of hits, but All-American 3's survival exceeds anything previously documented in combat reports from the Mediterranean theater. As the formation drones westward across the afternoon sky, All-American 3 gradually falls behind the other B-17s despite Lieutenant Bragg's best efforts to maintain formation speed, forcing the squadron to reduce power and accept increased vulnerability to fighter attack in order to stay with their damaged comrade. The isolated bomber presents an attractive target for any German or Italian fighters that might attempt an interception, but the sight of 9 other flying fortresses maintaining defensive formation around their wounded squadron mate discourages individual attacks against what appears to be a crippled aircraft. The mutual support doctrine that governs B-17 operations proves its worth as concentrated defensive firepower from multiple aircraft creates an umbrella of protection that even determined fighter pilots hesitate to penetrate. Navigator Harry Newsell calculates course corrections needed to compensate for All-American 3's reduced speed and altitude capabilities, plotting a route that will bring the formation over Biskra Airfield with minimum exposure to known German fighter bases, while allowing for the possibility that additional engine failures could force an emergency landing at one of several Allied airstrips scattered across Algeria. The navigator's calculations prove crucial as the damaged bomber continues losing altitude at a rate that threatens to put it within range of German anti-aircraft guns defending Tunisian positions along the coast. But the formation's westward track gradually carries them beyond the reach of Axis ground-based defenses and into airspace where Allied fighters can provide escort if needed. Bombardier Ralph Burbridge, who will survive the war and provide detailed interviews about the mission 69 years later, maintains his position in the aircraft's nose despite the obvious structural damage that makes every minute of flight a potential catastrophe, ready to assist with navigation and engine management while monitoring the horizon for signs of additional German fighter activity. His calm professionalism under extreme stress typifies the crew coordination that allows All-American 3 to continue functioning as a weapons system despite damage that would render most aircraft immediately uncontrollable, proving that American training standards and crew discipline provide advantages that extend far beyond simple numerical superiority in aircraft production. The flight back to Algeria becomes a masterclass in emergency aviation as Lieutenant Bragg develops intuitive techniques for controlling a bomber that no longer responds to conventional flight inputs, using engine power differentials and careful weight distribution to maintain something approximating controlled flight while the severed tail section flexes and vibrates in the slipstream. Co-pilot Engel monitors fuel consumption carefully, calculating whether their remaining engines can provide sufficient power to reach Biskra Airfield, or whether they will be forced to attempt an emergency landing at an intermediate base where facilities for major structural repairs may not be available. The mathematics of fuel flow, engine performance, and distance remaining create a complex equation with no margin for error, but the Wright Cyclone engines continue running smoothly despite the aerodynamic chaos created by the damaged fuselage. Radio traffic between All-American 3 and base operations reveals the extent to which the bomber's survival has exceeded everyone's expectations, with ground controllers initially assuming that damage reports must be exaggerated until photographic evidence confirms the impossible sight of a flying fortress flying with its tail attached by what appears to be wishful thinking and superior American engineering. Flight surgeon crews prepare for casualties that never materialize, while maintenance personnel begin assembling spare parts and repair equipment for what promises to be the most challenging structural restoration in 97th Bombardment Group history, though they cannot yet appreciate that All-American 3 will eventually be repaired, returned to service, and flown until near the end of the war before final retirement. 2.5 hours after the collision over Tunisia, Biskra Airfield appears on the horizon as All-American 3 limps toward home with its impossible cargo of 10 uninjured crew members who have witnessed the ultimate demonstration of American industrial supremacy over Axis engineering capabilities. Lieutenant Bragg begins his approach with extreme caution, knowing that the landing will subject the damaged airframe to stresses that could complete the separation paxi as BF-109 began over Tunisia, but the bomber responds to gentle control inputs as if determined to complete its mission regardless of the laws of physics that suggest it should have disintegrated hours ago. Ground crews gather along the runway to witness what many consider impossible, while ambulances and fire trucks stand ready for a disaster that has been anticipated since the first radio reports of the collision. The landing approach becomes a delicate balance between maintaining sufficient airspeed to prevent a stall and reducing speed enough to avoid overstressing the damaged airframe during touchdown, with Lieutenant Bragg using every technique acquired through hundreds of hours of training and combat experience while co-pilot Engel calls out airspeeds and altitudes with mathematical precision. The main landing gear touches down smoothly on Biskra's packed earth runway, but without a functional tailwheel, the bomber's rear fuselage gradually settles until the damaged tail section drags along the ground, creating sparks and dust clouds while the aircraft finally rolls to a stop after completing what many aviation experts will later describe as the most remarkable survival story in Flying Fortress history. As All-American 3 comes to rest on the Algerian airfield, ground crews swarm around the bomber to examine damage that seems impossible to survive, while the 10 crew members climb out through various hatches with no injuries more serious than minor cuts and bruises despite having flown 300 miles in an aircraft that should have disintegrated immediately after the collision. Tail gunner Sam Sarpoulos requires assistance climbing down from his isolated position in the severed tail section, but his weight throughout the flight actually helped stabilize the damaged empennage and prevent complete separation that would have doomed the entire crew. The sight of the massive diagonal gash through the fuselage confirms that Feldwebel Erich Paxia's final attack came within inches of completely destroying All-American 3, but American construction techniques and Boeing's obsessive attention to structural redundancy provided just enough strength to hold the aircraft together during its incredible journey home. Maintenance crews examining the wreckage discover that the collision severed every control cable except the single right elevator connection that provided Lieutenant Bragg's only means of controlling the bomber's pitch attitude, while hydraulic and electrical systems suffered complete failure that should have rendered the aircraft uncontrollable within minutes of the initial damage. The left horizontal stabilizer and elevator have been completely torn away, the vertical stabilizer cut precisely in half, and the fuselage structure reduced to minimal aluminum framework and skin that somehow continued carrying structural loads far beyond their design specifications. Boeing engineers studying photographs of the damage will use All-American 3 as a test case for improved structural design techniques, while crew training programs will cite the mission as proof that American bombers can survive damage that would destroy any other aircraft type. German intelligence officers analyzing Allied propaganda photographs of All-American 3 initially dismissed the images as obvious fabrications designed to boost American morale, unable to accept that any aircraft could survive structural damage of such magnitude and continue flying for hundreds of miles across contested airspace. The death of Feldwebel Erich Packzia in the collision represents a significant loss to Jägerschwader 53, which can ill afford the destruction of experienced fighter pilots with 16 confirmed victories, but his sacrifice achieves nothing beyond demonstrating the futility of conventional fighter attacks against properly constructed American heavy bombers flying in mutual defensive formations. German fighter tactics will evolve throughout 1943 to emphasize coordinated attacks by larger formations of fighters, but the fundamental problem of breaking up determined bomber formations protected by multiple 50-caliber machine guns remains unsolved. Italian fighter pilots studying combat reports from the February 1st mission expressed similar incredulity at All-American 3's survival. Having developed their own deep respect for B-17 durability through months of combat over Sicily and Malta, where American bombers consistently demonstrate their ability to absorb tremendous punishment while continuing to deliver their bomb loads on target. The Regia Aeronautica's most experienced aces acknowledge that attacking flying fortresses requires accepting casualty rates that Italian fighter units cannot sustain, particularly when American production lines continue delivering new bombers faster than Axis fighters can destroy them. The mathematics of attrition warfare clearly favor the United States, whose industrial capacity dwarfs anything Germany or Italy can produce even under optimal conditions. Japanese naval aviators studying intelligence reports from the Mediterranean theater take careful note of B-17 survival rates and defensive capabilities, having already learned through bitter experience in the Pacific that American bombers represent a qualitatively different threat from any previous aircraft type encountered in combat. Japanese pilots who survived encounters with flying fortresses consistently report that the aircraft can absorb incredible battle damage while maintaining formation discipline and delivering effective defensive fire, requiring coordinated attacks by multiple fighters to guarantee destruction, and even then often allowing enough bombers to reach their targets and complete their missions. The lesson of All-American 3 reinforces Japanese understanding that American industrial engineering has created weapons systems designed for sustained attrition warfare rather than the decisive single battles that characterized earlier conflicts. Boeing engineers in Seattle received detailed technical reports describing All-American 3's survival and immediately begin incorporating lessons learned into improved structural designs for subsequent B-17 variants, while also studying the incident for insights that could benefit other aircraft programs including the revolutionary B-29 Superfortress, then under development for long-range strategic bombing missions against Japan. The data gathered from examination of All-American 3's damaged structure provides invaluable information about aluminum failure modes under extreme stress, control system redundancy requirements, and crew protection techniques that will influence American aircraft design for decades beyond the end of World War II. The bomber's survival validates design philosophies that prioritize structural integrity and crew survivability over maximum performance specifications. Production workers at Boeing Plant 2 in Seattle, Douglas Aircraft in Long Beach, and Lockheed Vega in Burbank take justifiable pride in All-American 3's demonstration that their craftsmanship can literally make the difference between life and death for American aircrew operating in combat conditions thousands of miles from home. The incident becomes a rallying point for maintaining quality control standards and attention to detail during the massive production expansion that will eventually deliver over 12,000 flying fortresses to American and Allied air forces worldwide. Factory workers understand that every rivet properly installed, every weld correctly completed, and every structural component precisely manufactured contributes directly to the survival of young men like Lieutenant Bragg and his crew, who depend entirely on American industrial competence for their lives. All American 3 will eventually be repaired using a replacement tail section and returned to combat operations, flying missions throughout 1943 and 1944 before final retirement near the end of the war. But its most important contribution to the Allied victory occurs on February 1, 1943, when the bomber's impossible survival demonstrates conclusively that American engineering and production capabilities have created weapons systems capable of absorbing punishment that would destroy any comparable Axis aircraft. The psychological impact on German and Italian pilots cannot be measured statistically, but the growing realization that American bombers can survive damage that should guarantee their destruction contributes to declining Axis morale and increasing reluctance to press home attacks against flying fortress formations that bristle with defensive firepower and seem immune to conventional fighter tactics. The broader strategic implications of all American 3's survival extend far beyond a single mission over Tunisia, representing proof that American industrial supremacy has achieved qualitative as well as quantitative advantages over Axis production capabilities that focused on maximum performance rather than durability and crew protection. German and Italian aircraft designers emphasize speed, maneuverability, and firepower at the expense of structural redundancy and damage tolerance, creating fighters that could outperform American aircraft under ideal conditions but lacked the rugged construction needed for sustained operations under combat stress. The philosophical differences between American and Axis design approaches become increasingly apparent as the war progresses and attrition rates favor aircraft types that can continue operating despite battle damage. The legend of All-American 3 grows throughout the Mediterranean theater as word spreads among Allied aircrews that a B-17 actually flew home with its tail nearly severed, providing tangible proof that flying fortresses deserve their reputation as the most survivable heavy bombers ever built. Morale improvements among American bomber crews translate directly into improved mission effectiveness as airmen gain confidence that their aircraft can bring them home alive even if severely damaged by enemy action, while German and Italian fighter pilots increasingly question whether conventional attacks against properly defended bomber formations can achieve decisive results without prohibitive casualties among their own forces. The mathematics of air warfare begin shifting decisively in favor of the United States as German and Italian pilot training programs cannot replace experienced aircrew losses at the rate American factories produce new bombers with fresh crews. By May 1943, when Axis forces in Tunisia finally surrender after 6 months of desperate fighting, over 275,000 German and Italian troops enter Allied prisoner of war camps, while the remnants of the Luftwaffe and Regia Aeronautica withdraw to Sicily and Italy to prepare for the inevitable Allied invasion of southern Europe. The air war over Tunisia cost the Axis far more than they could afford in terms of experienced pilots and irreplaceable aircraft, while American production lines continue delivering new bombers faster than German factories can produce fighters to oppose them. All-American 3's demonstration of American engineering superiority on February 1st becomes symbolic of the broader industrial advantages that ultimately doom the Axis powers to defeat despite temporary tactical successes achieved through superior pilot training and aggressive tactics. The 10 crew members of All-American 3 return to operations after brief medical examinations reveal no serious injuries from their ordeal, though they will carry the memory of their incredible survival for the rest of their lives while serving as living testimony to the superiority of American aircraft design and construction techniques. Lieutenant Bragg continues flying combat missions until the end of the war, eventually retiring with decorations that recognize his skill in bringing a mortally damaged bomber home against impossible odds, while Bombardier Ralph Burbridge survives to provide detailed interviews about the mission 69 years later, shortly before his death at age 93. Their story becomes part of the larger narrative of American technological and industrial supremacy that transforms World War II from a contest between competing military forces into a demonstration of how superior engineering and production capabilities ultimately determine the outcome of modern warfare. The photograph taken by Lieutenant Cutforth of All-American 3 flying with its tail barely attached becomes one of the most widely reproduced images of World War II, serving as visual proof that American aircraft can survive damage that would destroy any comparable enemy machine while continuing to fulfill their mission requirements. German propaganda ministries attempt to dismiss the photograph as obvious fabrication, but their own pilots' combat reports confirm that American bombers routinely absorb punishment that should guarantee their destruction, forcing Axis air forces to develop increasingly desperate tactics that often result in greater losses among their own fighters than among the bombers they attack. The cumulative effect of such encounters gradually erodes German and Italian confidence in their ability to achieve air superiority over American formations, contributing to the overall collapse of Axis resistance in the Mediterranean theater. All-American 3's legacy extends far beyond the immediate tactical situation in Tunisia, influencing aircraft design philosophy, crew training programs, and strategic planning for the remainder of World War II while providing inspiration for countless American aircrew who understand that their survival depends entirely on the quality of aircraft produced by workers in Seattle, Long Beach, and Burbank who take personal pride in building weapons systems capable of bringing young Americans home alive from the most dangerous missions ever attempted. The bomber's incredible survival story becomes part of American military folklore, passed down through generations of aircrew who understand that superior engineering and manufacturing quality provide advantages that extend far beyond simple numerical superiority in production statistics. The 10 men who flew All-American 3 home on February 1, 1943, prove conclusively that American industrial supremacy has created aircraft capable of surviving the impossible while completing their missions and protecting the lives of those who fly them into harm's way thousands of miles from home.